Welcome to Hollywood Latest Reports. It was a moment that no one in the Swaggart family, or the congregation, ever saw coming. The lights inside Family Worship Center dimmed softly, the choir stood still, and all eyes turned toward Grace Brumley as she took a deep breath, clutching the microphone close to her trembling hands. What followed was not just another Sunday testimony. It was a raw, emotional confession from the heart of a woman who had carried more silence than words for years. Her voice cracked with emotion as she turned toward Joseph Larson, her husband, her confidant, and the man she had walked beside through trials that few could imagine. The air in the sanctuary grew heavy, the kind of silence that only truth could command. Grace began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes," she said, "love doesn't look like perfection. It looks like forgiveness. It looks like standing beside someone even when your heart feels broken, and it looks like choosing to speak when silence becomes too heavy." Those words seemed to echo through the hall, touching every soul in the room, and leaving even Gabriel Swaggart, usually composed and confident, completely speechless. The moment was powerful because Grace wasn't just speaking to Joseph, she was speaking through her pain, her growth, and her faith. For years, the Larson and Swaggart families had been surrounded by rumors, misunderstandings, and emotional tension. But that night, Grace's words broke through all the noise. She looked at Joseph with tears glistening in her eyes and said, "We've been through storms, but even when the thunder scared me, I knew you'd be there, not as a perfect man, but as a man who never stopped believing in redemption." Joseph lowered his head, visibly fighting back tears. Gabriel, sitting just a few feet away, was frozen in disbelief. The young pastor who had seen countless testimonies and heard hundreds of emotional moments was suddenly silent, unable to speak, unable to blink, as Grace poured her heart out in front of everyone. The emotion in her words was beyond performance. It was real, raw, and painfully honest. Grace continued, speaking of the challenges they had faced, not just as a couple, but as individuals trying to hold on to faith in moments when everything felt uncertain. "There were times," she admitted, "when I didn't recognize us anymore, when our laughter faded and our prayers felt unanswered. But even then, God was shaping our story, not to destroy it, but to teach us how to love through the breaking." The audience was still, their faces wet with tears. Even those watching online could feel the intensity of what was unfolding. Then came the line that broke everyone's heart. Grace looked at Joseph and said softly, "You taught me how to sing even when my voice shook." That one sentence carried years of love, struggle, and unspoken forgiveness. Joseph's lips trembled, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire church held its breath. Gabriel finally stood up, moved beyond words, simply placing his hand over his heart. He didn't try to speak. There was nothing left to say. As Grace finished, she turned to Gabriel with a soft smile and said, "Sometimes, healing doesn't come through sermons or songs. It comes through honesty." Her eyes met his, and it was clear she wasn't just addressing her brother-in-law. She was speaking to a man who had watched others' pain from a distance but was now seeing it up close, human and unfiltered. Gabriel's eyes glistened with tears as he mouthed the words, "Thank you." After the service ended, social media was flooded with clips and posts from people who had witnessed the moment live. The hashtag Grace and Joseph moment began trending among the Ministries followers. Many wrote that they had never seen such vulnerability from anyone in the Swaggart circle before. "Grace Brumley just reminded the world what faith and forgiveness really look like," one viewer commented. Another wrote, "That wasn't a speech, it was a soul speaking." Later that night, Joseph posted a simple message on his page. Some words change everything. He didn't need to say more. Those who had seen Grace's heartfelt message already knew what he meant. For the first time in a long time, the Larson and Swaggart families seemed united, not by performance or perfection, but by shared humanity. Behind the scenes, those close to the family said that Gabriel was deeply moved. One insider revealed that Gabriel told a close friend afterward, "That preached about grace my whole life, but tonight I saw it alive." He reportedly reached out to both Grace and Joseph, expressing how their honesty had opened his eyes to the real meaning of forgiveness and love. Days later, Grace shared a brief reflection during a small women's meeting. "When I spoke that night," she said, "I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just tired of pretending that pain doesn't exist in people who serve God. Faith doesn't erase pain. It gives you the strength to face it." Her words once again resonated with many who had struggled silently behind smiles. The emotional evening marked a turning point for the entire Swaggart family. It wasn't just about Grace and Joseph anymore. It was about what happens when people choose honesty over appearances. For years, fans of the ministry had admired their music, their sermons, and their family unity. But now, they saw something deeper: vulnerability. It made them real. As one longtime church member put it, that night, we didn't just see a family of ministers. We saw a family of humans who love, hurt, and heal like the rest of us. Even a week later, people were still talking about it. Every time someone replayed the clip of Grace's trembling voice, it brought new tears. The moment reminded everyone that behind every sermon and song is a story, and sometimes the most powerful testimony doesn't come from the pulpit, but from the heart of a woman brave enough to speak her truth. Grace Brumley's heartfelt words weren't rehearsed or planned. They came from a place of deep reflection, love, and surrender. And in that vulnerability, she reminded the world, and her family, that love isn't about perfection, it's about grace. In the days following that unforgettable evening, the atmosphere around Family Worship Center seemed to shift. Something invisible, something spiritual, had changed. People who once came to hear sermons now came hoping to feel that same honesty again. It was as if Grace Brumley had opened a window into the human heart, and the breeze of truth was still flowing through the halls. Even the worship team said that rehearsals felt different. There was more emotion in every song, more meaning behind every lyric. Grace and Joseph, meanwhile, tried to go back to their normal routines, but it was impossible to ignore the echo of what had happened. Every time Grace walked into the sanctuary, someone would stop her, not to praise her, but to thank her. One elderly woman told her, "You reminded me it's okay to cry again." A young couple said her words helped them forgive each other after months of silence. Grace would listen, smile gently, and say, "If God can use my pain to heal someone else, then every tear was worth it." But what most people didn't see was what happened behind closed doors. That night, after everyone had left, Grace and Joseph sat together in the quiet of their home. No cameras, no crowd, just two hearts trying to process what had been said. Joseph looked at her with a mix of awe and guilt. "I didn't know you still carried so much," he admitted softly. Grace gave a faint smile. "Neither did I, until I let it out." There was a long silence between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with emotion. Then Joseph reached for her hand. "Grace," he said, his voice shaking, "if my mistakes ever dimmed your light, I'm sorry." Tears filled her eyes again as she whispered back, "You didn't dim it, Joseph. Life did. But together, we're learning to shine again." Those weren't just words of comfort. They were a quiet promise of healing. The next morning, Gabriel Swaggart called them. His voice sounded more emotional than usual. "Grace," he began, "I've been thinking about what you said, about honesty. You don't know how much it meant to me. I've been hiding behind my own walls for a long time, too." Grace listened silently, her heart softening at his tone. "We all do, Gabriel," she said gently, "even the strongest ones." That conversation sparked something in Gabriel. Later that week, he opened up during a live service, admitting that even leaders sometimes struggle with feelings of emptiness and pressure. He spoke about watching Grace's moment and realizing how much strength there is in vulnerability. "We preach grace," he said to the congregation, "but sometimes we forget to live it." Grace reminded me that night what it really means. The crowd responded with heartfelt applause, some crying openly. For many who had followed the Swaggart family for years, this newfound transparency was both shocking and healing. The ministry, known for its polished image, suddenly became more relatable. People no longer saw unreachable figures. They saw a family walking the same emotional journey as everyone else. Meanwhile, Grace's message continued to ripple beyond Louisiana. Christian blogs, online magazines, and even secular platforms began writing about her emotional speech. One article titled, "When Grace Speaks, Hearts Listen," went viral. The author described her as a symbol of modern faith, not flawless, but fearless in truth. Thousands of people shared the video clip, writing comments like, "I felt God in her words," and "This is what real ministry looks like." Joseph, usually quiet about personal matters, finally shared his side during an online devotional session. He said, "Sometimes you love someone so deeply that you forget they're human too. You think their silence means peace, but sometimes it's pain. Grace taught me to listen again, not just to her words, but to her heart." His voice broke halfway through the sentence, and the chat was filled with crying emojis and words of encouragement. It was a rare, raw display from the man many had only seen behind a pulpit or microphone. The following Sunday, Grace was back on stage, singing through it all. Her voice carried a new depth, trembling but strong. When she reached the line, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Many in the audience stood up, raising their hands in tears. It was clear that her faith had become her song, and her song had become everyone's prayer. After the service, Gabriel hugged her tightly, whispering, "You changed something in this place, Grace. You brought back the heart." She smiled through tears and replied, "No, God did. I just stopped hiding." Even Donnie and Debbie Swaggart, who rarely comment publicly on personal matters, were said to be deeply moved. Donnie reportedly told a staff member, "That girl has more courage than most of us preachers combined." Debbie, emotional after watching the replay, sent Grace a short message, "Proud of you, sweetheart. You reminded us all what love really is." Weeks passed, but the moment refused to fade. People began calling it the Night of Grace. It wasn't just a title. It became a symbol of renewal. For the first time in a long time, Family Worship Center felt united not just by doctrine, but by compassion. Grace later shared in a private women's Bible study that she had been praying for months for a moment of release. "I felt like I was drowning in my own silence," she confessed. "But when I spoke that night, I realized healing doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes you have to break so light can enter." The women around her cried as she spoke. One of them said, "You helped us believe it's okay to not be okay." Grace simply nodded and said, "That's where faith begins." Even now, whenever Grace and Joseph stand together on stage, people sense a new energy between them. They hold hands a little tighter, smile a little softer, and sing with the kind of passion that only comes from walking through fire. As for Gabriel, he continues to mention that night in his messages. "When Grace spoke, God spoke through her," he once said during a broadcast. And I believe he reminded all of us, even the preachers, that grace isn't a sermon, it's a story. And that story continues to unfold. Every heart that heard Grace Brumley's words that night carries a piece of that moment, a reminder that faith is not about pretending to be whole, but about choosing to love while healing. Her courage became a quiet revolution in a world that often confuses perfection with faith. In the end, the most powerful moments aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they happen in a quiet sanctuary, when a trembling voice decides to speak truth. And on that unforgettable night, Grace Brumley's trembling voice became a testimony that even silence can be sacred, and that love in its purest form can leave even the strongest men